don't know if you saw the title of our Speakeasy, but it's from Woodstock to Wanderlust. And I don't know, Ron, how long have we known each other? 20 years. Yeah, we've been living, Ron lives in Topanga, and I live in the wild part just next door in the mountains. And we've been part of the yoga scene in Los Angeles. And when I was doing my master's thesis at UCLA in dance movement therapy, I was really interested in, really what are the origins of yoga in the West? And we all know some of those, real turning points of Vivekananda at the turn of the century, speaking at the Parliament of World Religions, Paramahamsa, Yogananda coming. But really there was a whole wave that I think many of kind of the younger generation of yoga doesn't really know about. I was born in 1967, so I was only 2 years old when Woodstock was happening. But my father gave me the name Shiva because he loved the image of Nataraj. And so, I was growing up in Berkeley during that time. And so when Ron and I were speaking about, really what was the beginning of yoga in the West, it really was Woodstock in this wave that we're currently on. And so we wanted to start by showing you some clips and then speak a little bit more and then show you a really insightful clip on kind of the first Kundalini yoga classes at a festival. And this was really the first time that yoga and music really came together in a contemporary context. We know that yoga and music have always been one. This is the realization, of course, of the vibratory universe, Anada Yoga, the sacredness of the raga and the rasa, and that music transforms our consciousness. I just came from this movers and shakers section. My background is in movement anthropology, and really when we go back, it doesn't matter across time and space, across cultures, we can see that festivals are such a natural rhythm. It's actually unnatural for us to not gather. And the thing that yoga and music share that we're going to come back to, and I'm really want you to hear mainly from Ron, because Ron was at Woodstock, and that's when he first got turned on to Kundalini yoga, and it really gives us an insight, from Woodstock to Wanderlust, about really the power of festival in our ancestral lineage and also in our contemporary context. So this is Richie Havens. This is actually a piece that was he'd already been jamming for about an hour and a half, and the next artist hadn't arrived by helicopter yet. All right, how many of you have seen the Woodstock movie? Yeah, a few? Oh, okay. And so he actually made this song, was coming through him live. So we just wanted to see a little clip, and then you see Swami Satchitananda, who I remember the first time that I had darshan with Swami Satchitananda. He starts off by saying, "Life is change, learn to surf." So he was really a seminal figure at Woodstock, so let's take that in a little bit.
Freedom, 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 freedom. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Yeah, long, long, long way from my home. Yeah. Clap your hands, 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 yeah, clap your hands. Hey, 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 yeah, 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 yeah.
to see Swami Satchidananda.
America leads the whole world in several ways. Very recently, when I was in the East, the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi met me and asked me what's happening in America. And I said, America is becoming a whole. America is helping everybody in the material field, but the time has come for America to help the whole world with spirituality also.
So this is a really good place for us to start with, because Swami Satchidananda was really imparting to us that the Dharma was going to be reborn here in the West, which it really has. Everything that's in Nepal, in Tibet, in Bali, Sri Lanka, where I've practiced and studied, in India, has now manifested itself here in the West. In some of the linkage between Woodstock and Wanderlust is this wonderful thread, this wonderful core of an appreciation of the joint spiritual practices and an appreciation for coming together around the unique energy of the collective, the tribal consciousness, the desire to be at one with each other and to have our practices. The funny part of Woodstock was most of us went with lots of pharmaceuticals in our suitcases, and there were no yoga mats, and most of us had come from traditional religious backgrounds. I was wandering around Harvard Square in the different bookstores, and I remember wandering by this one bookstore, and there was the teachings of Suzuki Roshi, volume 1 and 2 from the University of Chicago. Then I saw autobiography of Yogi, and then Be Here Now. And I was an Irish Catholic, I was a Eagle Boy Scout, top of my class, and an altar boy. And I walked over, and there was sitar music playing outside of the Harvard bookstore. And I closed my eyes for a moment, and I felt like I had come home. And I at first didn't recognize any of this, but I was like completely drawn into them. And I went into the bookstore, and I only had a little bit of money in my pocket, and I bought all 3 books. And then I went straight to the Harvard Co-op where you could have cappuccino, and I sat and I read all afternoon and into the evening. And something awakened. And then in those days, there was no cell phones, no internet, no Twitter, no Facebook.
Right.
There wasn't even the announcements of Woodstock in the newspaper. It was all person to person. So you'd go into a restaurant and a waitress would say, after she'd give you your eggs and whatever, so are you going to the festival? And then you'd say, well, what festival? And then one person would go back to their dorm room and tell another person, and what started out to be like 25 people or 50 people or 100 people ended up somewhere between 500,000 and really 1 million. And I remember when I got to Woodstock, first part of my time there, I probably really don't remember what I was doing. But about Saturday afternoon when Swami Satchidananda came on, and I think I was just starting to come down, I went to heard the talk, and then he went and taught a class. It was my very first hatha yoga class. And most of it was pranayama. And I remember just like my aura expanding, and feeling the shushuma and the other 2 sources of energy flowing out of my top of my head, and then like kind of floating back to the people I was with. And I was going, whoa, you've got to check this thing out called yoga, because I'm higher than we all were for the last day and a half. And so everybody in my band said, okay, let's do it. And so we went to find Satchidananda, and we did his class again. And then we heard, oh, there's this guy named Tom Law, and he's one of the senior teachers for Yogi Bhajan and Kundalini Yoga. You got to try his class because it's all pranayama and it's all kriyas. So we went to that, and then we got like so high that it was time to eat, and everybody said, we don't need to eat, let's just keep breathing. And so we kind of did the breathing all through the night. And so that was kind of the first taste for us that the Dharma had come from the East and it had become reborn, like the rising of the sun in the West. And years later, I was dating a nurse at a hospital I was working at, where I was teaching meditation, because in my matriculation from Hatha Yoga to Kundalini Yoga, I ended up becoming an ordained Zen Buddhist monk as well as a psychologist. And so I was teaching mindfulness at Cedar Sinai Meditation. I was starting to date this nurse, and she said to me, why don't we watch the Woodstock movie? So I watched the Woodstock movie with her, and then she said, what are you doing tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? And I said, nothing. She said, you gotta go to this yoga class. It's like no other yoga class that you've ever been to. And I said, okay, where is it? And who's it with? And she said, well, it's with this woman named Shiva.
Oh, you never told me that.
And there was, back then,
Wow.
it was like 8 to 12 people in the class.
Yes.
And Shiva was doing saging. Remember?
Sure.
And going around and adjusting people. And it was a very, very holy experience. And I remember walking out, and I was holding Catherine's hand, and I was going, I can't find my way to the car, I'm so stoned. I said, you're right, this is sort of like Woodstock, but it's even better. Do you want to take it from there?
Oh. Let's see this clip of Tom Law at Woodstock and kind of speak about the continuity of, you know, yoga music then and yoga music now.
He was one of the very first 3 Kundalini Yoga teachers, and then myself and about 25 other people were initiated. Now he's teaching a class for 500,000 people, and none of us knew anything about yoga. We're all in the mud, and half of everyone's very high.
And relax, and just feel the energy. These are all beginning exercises of Kundalini Yoga. Yoga means union. It's the same energy that drugs give you, force a rush on with, right? It's the same channels, only drugs do it for you, and this way you can do it yourself. You can do it when you want to, and you don't have to score to be able to do it. All you got to score is some clean air. And we even did, I learned it in Los Angeles, and there was only a couple of months of clean air when I was learning it, so, you know. That's hard too these days. But while there's still some clean air left, it'd be groovy to experiment with it, like these guys who have been experimenting for at least 6,000 years and getting very high behind it. The Kundalini nerve, it's called the nerve of awareness. You can't dissect it. It's a current that runs up the center of your spine. I don't know if any of you have ever sat down and crossed your legs and smoked DMT and watched what happens, but what happens to me is this big thing goes up my spine and flashes in my brain, right? Well, apparently that's what is going to happen if I do this stuff and learn it. It takes years, I guess, but this is the beginning of it. These exercises are exercises to create those channels in your body and to free your body of blocks. Major block is your solar plexus. That's why we're doing a lot of breath of fire. It loosens the solar plexus. Then there are blocks in your spine and back and wherever you got blocks to keep that energy from flowing. Go within yourself, meditate on each breath, make each breath a complete breath, and if you do it right, you'll be flashing momentarily. Just keep up, concentrate on your breathing.
You get a feeling for how basic and rudimentary the early teachings were.
just you see the glimpses of Woodstock, and you can see there was a kind of raw energy, also an innocence in the way that people, an openness, a receptivity. And I think anybody who's a yoga teacher over the last decade knows that one of the main challenges that we work with is actually our resistance, And so I was reflecting, and Ron and I were talking about, really what's the shift, though, that has occurred in the yoga community. And I think it really is that there's been a deeper integration. I think people actually have now a daily practice, an embodied practice. And I think there's perhaps even a taboo. I don't think anyone would say, oh, well, why do you practice yoga? I think there's a little taboo to say, I like to get stoned on yoga. I don't think people are quite willing to say, just how powerful the shift of consciousness that our yoga practice can give us. And being with Wanderlust over the last 3 years, I've seen a shift in the kind of participation, and also participating, of course, in other yoga conferences. This is really the one festival where yoga and music are kind of like equally given a full platform, and a depth of exposure to many different practices. And so we're kind of entering into the part where we're going to hear from you, but I wanted to hear back with Ron because now we're getting on, let's see, this is 40 years ago, and reflecting from the long view of really the long ancestral view. We say, how long have we been having festivals? From my perspective, we can't even say that yoga is 6,000 years old. We can look back to when we were first had our ability to make fire, which recently the carbon dating has been pushed back to 1 million years. Before that, it was around 870,000 years. There's a site in Israel. This is a site in South Africa. So definitely, as long as we were able to make fire, that means we came around the fire consciously. And definitely, we've been responding to this need for being able to kind of shift in a whole body level, both individually and in the collective. So when we were talking about, well, really, what is it, the ingredients of this transformation? It's really quite simple. It's still been around from the beginning. It's always the people, right? The quality of the people. And I definitely do see, even just from teaching yesterday and this morning in Movers and Shakers, whether it's because the fires have been burning and that creates a kind of burning of the normal resistances of separation, and I do this kind of yoga, I'm not sure if I want to try this kind of yoga. All those things, that kind of hardening that sometimes comes as practice formalizes. For me, I've really felt a depth of opening, and I feel that there's less snobbery, which I think was really an uneducated snobbery, that yoga is here and music is here. I feel that there's a greater integration. So the people, music as one of the oldest unifying forces, and then of course seeing that as a form of yoga when across culturally. So what would you add to that, Dr. Ron?
One of the beautiful transcending chords between Woodstock and Wanderlust is that there are some differences, but mainly many similarities. And the differences are actually for the better with Wanderlust, because as you could see, very primitive yoga, not even yoga mats. The instruction, very basic. And here we have the wonderful refinement of vinyasa yoga, and there's so many core power yoga and hatha yoga and Ayurvedic yoga. And so on one state of consciousness, we've had really a quantum shift in the same way that like Wanderlust is kind of like the iPhone, and Woodstock was sort of like the beginning phone. They used to have it in a big suitcase and carry it around like James Bond. And we still, though, have all the major appreciation of gathering together, of gathering the tribe, gathering the council of healers, elders, sages, students, who are all in that holy sacred place to come together, to take a unified sacred pause out of the busyness of our daily lives to worship, and to worship at the fountain and the great well of being, that great well of divinity that we can drink within, and we can share the knowledge of the Yoga Shastras through thousands of years, that we're able to share the knowledge of the Buddha and the teachings of mindfulness in Zen and in Dzogchen. And then we have the excitement and the joy of the music and the food, and then the community, which is us. And in that place, Rumi used to say, the place that we meet that is most holy and most sacred and most divine is in that place of the heart, in that interior chamber where the jewel resides. And that jewel is in each and every one of you. And when we gather together as a collective, we become that unified, and what we call it in Buddhism, that co-dependent originated coming together as the jewel of the oneness. And then the music allows us to move from the concentration and the effort and the discipline of the spiritual practice, just like at Woodstock, to party on at night and to share from the hard work and effort. We have to play, and we have to have space and time to elevate the soul and to let the soul come alive and the soul to sing. And so the similarities are really unique because it's the people, it's us. And as Ram Dass always says, it's not me and you or the teachers and the students, but we're one. And we all have something to learn and all have something to teach each other. And when we come together in the collective tribe, there's an interchange that goes on. It goes on the intellectual level, it goes on the practical teaching level, and then there's this whole other magical level of the being together. I walked into Shiva's class yesterday morning because I wanted to start my festival right in the zone. And I saw all the mats laid out in long lines that you usually see at yoga studios. And the very first thing Shiva said is, get off the mats, we'll come into the center of the circle. And then she took out these little beads and we all started dancing. And then we were in that same vibe that you saw in the crowd in Woodstock. Because we start with the dancing. And the dancing has been with us from the beginning of time in man, when they sat around a fire and they wanted to warm themselves and they wanted to have a unified feeling of a co-jointness, of co-independent origination, of all beings being together in celebration, to find the divine and to awaken and to, as Rumi says, to drink of the wine, and he's not talking about the regular wine, but to drink of the wine of the soul.
Yeah.
Drink of the wine of the soul. We're here to drink of that wine when we're on the mat, when we're sitting and doing meditation, when we're out hiking, when we're celebrating at night with Ziggy Marley, that we're drinking of that wine. We're here to quench our thirst, because we're all seekers, seeking in search of a truth that isn't outside. Even though all of the teachers are sages and they're mentors and they have great wisdom and great technical skill, our jobs are to impart to you the transmissional link of the bridge to how to use those practices to find the divine and to awaken it inside of yourself, to be your own guru, that we are all Buddhas. And as all Buddhas, we are awakening to our own Buddha nature. So we bow not to the Buddha as the little man, but we bow to the Buddha in all of you, which is in all of us.
I think there are many things that we can, this is a fun part. I think it rained and it just became this spontaneous music and mudslide. I think we'd like to hear from you. What questions you have, any insights. There's a lot also that we can unpack, we're still evolving. Please, I think, is there some mic? Yeah, yeah.
People traveled a long way to get to Woodstock. Many people have traveled to come here, and Wanderlust is named after traveling.
Right.
So I'm curious about that third leg of the music and the yoga and travel, and how does that fit into this tribal consciousness and what we're talking about today?
Well, the journey of 10,000 miles always begins with one step. And the mythologist Joseph Campbell taught me when I was a young student in Amherst. He said that there are two levels of the journey. There's the one journey that we go on when we come to a place like Wanderlust or to Woodstock, or we go on a spiritual retreat to India, or we're sitting high in the Himalayas and Ganesh MacLeod up with the Dalai Lama, and we're in the Tibetan library and we're studying sacred texts and scriptures and the meditations. And so that's the external journey. And then there's the internal journey. And in the tarot deck and in the alchemy of self-healing, you always get, when you take a journey, you get when you return what's called the boon. And the boon is the gift. And you get that gift by going out on the journey in the wanderlust energy, with the excitement, to find and to experience and to taste something new, something fresh, something that's really alive, to venture into the unknown. And it's outside. But all the while, there's another journey going on, and that's the journey inside. And some of us need to go out because we have wanderlust. I mean, I know Shiva and myself and Dimitri and Dana, many of us, we want to go out into the world and to travel and to taste different cultures and to taste different spiritual experiences. And then there are times where I know it's true for Shiva and myself, we'll hunker down in our place up in the Santa Monica Mountains. And we won't go out for weeks or months at a time other than to do what we have to do. But we come home and we're going on the inner journey. So the wanderlust is both the outer journey of what you take back, and then an inner journey gets opened up simultaneously. And that's where the wisdom, that's where the truth, and that's where the real awakening occurs. That's where awakened intelligence, not intellectual intelligence, but spiritual intelligence becomes awakened.
Yeah. And I think I would just add that I think it's important to be able to see on a larger, a macro level. I think particularly in the yoga world, our local community is so important. And yet when we kind of go to a bigger tent, then we're able to make sure that our lens is not too narrow. I think this can happen in different kind of subcultures within yoga, and I think that the big tent is really important. I think, like with the Global Mala Project, I think it's important that that happens at a local level. We tried to bring yoga studios together. Like in Los Angeles, we brought 108 yoga studios together because it's just separation is very easy for adult minds. And I think this is the role of festivals, which can be seen in like a hierarchy of needs to be like low on the totem pole. But actually our ancestors always really valued festivals because what Ram was describing is they create this liminal space, this space that's outside of everyday rhythms. And I think that's what we kind of feel on an organic level with a wanderlust, is when it's time to go out, like on a kind of almost like biodiversity. It's time to get fertilized from a different field, right? How the bees travel to different fields. A monoculture is not good for our inner ecology either. And so, there's a rhythm to that though, and certainly the local level is very important. And I know that, Wanderlust is also about, fertilizing the Colorado yoga community. And so, yeah.
Dimitri, do you want to play just a short clip of Joe? Because one of the things that's really touched me at being with Wanderlust is meeting all of you. And I've had so many different encounters with so many beautiful, lovely people. And very quickly, our friends. A little help with our friends, because our friends help us.
Oh, the day you say because you're on your own. I tell never you say it no more. Only to love my friend. I got the bottom thing all the way. Everybody got the love I need. I'm a bad away. Dear someone love. All I need is love. Oh, the dream right on Lord. Everybody love. Oh, I love her. And I'm gonna be living right. And nobody knows how it is.
What I love about this song, because it really takes you there. It
Yeah,
takes
yeah.
you right into our heart of how we need all of each other, is in Buddhist teachings, there's a triangle. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha is the body of knowledge. As I said earlier, we don't bow to the Buddha really as a deity in Buddhism. We bow to his wisdom that he taught. And then there's the Dharma, which is our path. It's our yoga practice, it's our meditational practices, it's our Tai Chi practices, it's how we eat, how we love, how we live our life. And then the third part of the triangle is the Sangha, and that's us. The Sangha is the community. And all the spiritual practices say that when you get more than one or two people together, the strength of the Sangha really helps us to deepen into our practices, because the Sangha is about support. So Wanderlust is the container of the support of the Sangha. It provides for us a coming together in a collective, unified way to really go deep and to have a hell of a lot of fun at the same time. Any other questions, comments, sharings?
Yeah. And please come on down. And I think the reason why we wanted to bring this topic forward is it's also very easy to just move through a festival in a kind of shallow way. You know, like, okay, I mean, if you're on the other side as a teacher, it's slowly disappearing, but there sometimes in a subtle way you can feel like, okay, what new tricks you're going to give me, what you're going to do for me, you know, just the shopping, you know, that whole shallow way is like a missed opportunity. Yeah.
When I was a little kid, my mom played Joni Mitchell's Woodstock to me when I was like 4 years old.
Yeah.
And I thought about it when you were telling the story about the waitress, because you know when you're a little girl, you're not in the restaurant getting told about the festival and you get to go because you're a little kid and you don't get to go. But the song, you know, I came upon a child of God walking along the road, asked me, tell you where are you going, and this he told me. And so I heard that story, and being like 3 or 4 years old, that was like one of the first fairy tales that I got to hear, instead of like the Snow White and all that stuff, because that's what my parents were sharing with me. And I just wanted to share that with you because this is my first time to Wanderlust, and my mom's husband was a musician, and so I got called to be a musician for my life. But I was also learning yoga because of their books and the things that they had, you know, which were my like the books that I would pick up instead of the fairy tale books. And that informed me for my life about how yoga could help me as a musician take care of myself. And I felt like that whole calling of that song kind of, I didn't get to go to the festival, but it called me and informed me through my life about that there was community. I grew up in Texas, so I knew there was this community out there, but I didn't see it everywhere where I lived. And I just want to thank you guys for doing this and talking about this, because I totally saw it on the schedule and thought, wow, I can't believe they're connecting these two things. And it makes sense, but the music and the yoga and the place I didn't get to go, even though I heard about it as a little kid.
The wisdom and beauty of Joni's song, and it's the reason why she wrote it, is, interestingly enough, she had flown out with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young to go up and be at the festival, to play with them and play alone. But they took a different plane, and when they got into JFK and they saw on the radio and the TV that the New York State Thruway was closed, and they realized they wouldn't be able to get up there, they hired 2 helicopters for, like, in those days, $10,000 was like maybe $100,000 today. So they hired 2, and they flew up there. And Joni was with her record company manager, David Geffen. And he's kind of a real prissy type guy. And he says, no, we're going to check into the Four Seasons, and we'll watch it on television. And so Joni had this huge heartbreak where she had to watch it on television. But she was telling us one night up in Laurel Canyon that the moment she wrote the song, she was there. And she realized that there would be, for ages to come, people who didn't get to go there, but they would want the experience of having gone there. And that song allows us to not have a separation of, oh, I wasn't there. Because when you're right here at Wanderlust, you can go right there, here.
Exactly.
Hi, thank you for being here. I would like to just say that I'm well aware of the transformational power of music and movement and dance and yoga as well. And I love going to music festivals. And deep inside of me, I am saddened because the culture that fosters and that is attracted by these music festivals is still overwhelmingly brought there for or around the use of drugs and or alcohol as the primary drug of choice of this country. And still, although subdued or intoxicated, I do witness people reaching plateaus of awakening or levels of awakening and spiritual progression even through the dance. And I would just ask you how you feel about that, and if music and dance are strong enough medicine to cut through the substance and nurture a cultural creative in this day and age.
Sure. You want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think we were dancing together at 8 a.m. this morning, right? Yes. And it was amazing experience, nonverbal, for almost an hour and a half. And I think for me, because I've been leading freeform movement for over 15 years, that's really, there's many, I would say that it's growing. People wanting to be in spaces that you can release inhibitions without an external substance. And you can see it's actually really, really easy. So I feel that's actually increasing and growing, and I think that it's just going to be part of everybody's individual journey as to how that unfolds. But I do think that there is a shift of people finding the natural currents inside, but you may be going to a lot, because I see you're with the Yerba Mate, you may be going to a lot of different festivals, And I think the place that we're always in is just seeing through all of the different layers to that original spark that we all hold. That's the gaze that I like to hold. So keep holding that gaze and keep dancing in freedom like you were this morning. It was amazing. Yeah.
And I would add to that rather than preaching all purism or total decadence on the other side, that everyone has to find their own path. I come from a long line, because I'm Irish and Celtic, a long line of Irish alcoholics. So those genes, they don't really, in our family, we have 10 children, and there's 6 sisters and 3 brothers. We always joke and laugh at Thanksgiving. The 4 of us are the Buddhist yogis who go to yoga and study Buddhism and aren't kind of totally wild and into all that. And then there's the other 6 that are for endlessly going in and out of, AA. I think you have to find your own balance. From Woodstock at 19 until about 35, I never drank, I never touched a doobie, I didn't eat meat, I didn't even eat eggs. But then something starts to soften when you know that you're not going to veer into addiction, where you can at times experiment and what do you call it? In India, the chillam. Sometimes the yoga babas.
Yes, Kumbh Mela.
At the Kumbh Mela. I was once standing next to the line with these Naga babas that most of them are naked, and they have these huge spears, and they dress in loincloths. There's thousands of them, and they have this, and you can imagine, there's about 6 million people, because I was at the half mela, and the big mela is about 12 million.
It's actually next year,
Yeah.
2013.
And the saints and sages, they come out of caves, they come out of the forest, and there's all these Nagababas. And some of them are completely, they take their sunglasses off and you're just blinded by the purity because they've been in the forest or in the cave and they live with these bowls. And one guy came out to me in Vrindavan and he came out of like nowhere and he went, food, food. And so, I gave him bakshish and I gave him my water bottle and then he disappeared back in. And so I'm at the Kumbh Mela, and there's all these Nagababas, which are really holy saints, and they've been purifying for years for the Mela in caves and in the forest and doing their spiritual practices. And then I noticed that there was a group, and they were all like smoking chillum, which is like hash. And at first I went, oh my God, gee, how decadent of them. And then I started to talk to some folks I was with from Neem Karoli Baba's tent. And they said to me, no, it's all a balance. And everybody has to find what their balance is. And one thing about finding balance, I do want to impart something that's probably not imparted at festivals, is when you're at a festival, you think everybody else is happy, and if you're bumming out and you're feeling depressed or down or isolated or disconnected, that there's something wrong with you. If you're having a low point, or your heart's breaking because someone's just broken up with you, reach out. You'd be surprised if you start to talk to somebody and you actually tell them, I'm feeling depressed. Everyone seems so happy after they dance, but I feel really down. Reach out to the Sangha and you'll be amazed that people will connect with you. They'll give you a big hug and they'll say, let's sit down and have some chai and talk. And so that's finding balance also.
Yeah.
Next question.
Okay, so you guys have been studying this stuff and living it for 40 years. It's been really interesting to hear all that. What do you see happening in the next 40 years? So where do you see everything going?
Well, for me, and Shiva and I asked this question to each other the other night, and I like to see the unknown as possessing infinite possibility. And since we started with the Apple I computer, and now we have an iPhone, I like to imagine the spiritual consciousness that right here, as a metaphor, we're in the iPhone and with the iPad, and we're going to have this unknown quantum shift and leap. That, yes, we'll probably take yoga and sitting meditation with us, but it's going to go into a quantum dimension. And instead of saying it's going to be this, what we need to do is collectively, we need to all envision it and imagine how we're going to take it into the future, rather than to wait to take it into the future. Because the real spiritual teachers like Mahatma Gandhi, they would sit and meditate and fast, and then he would have downloads of images that would give him the exact next step that he needed to do in his fight for freedom to separate India from Britain. And he had in one of those images, he saw salt. And then he kept meditating and he kept going, why am I visualizing salt? And then he got up the next morning and he said to his wife, we're going to march 126 miles from where he lived to the sea. And he still didn't know what was going to happen at the sea, but when they got to the sea, he had the download of, if we can take salt from the ocean, we won't have to buy it from the British, and it will be the beginning of separation from independence on the British. So what we need to do as a collective, every time we get together in a festival like this, is to spend some time quietly meditating and or talking over tea and envisioning, where do we all want to take it? What's it going to look like in the future? And we all know all the funny stories of Zen enlightenment that come from the past. But that's the past. That's like saying, well, we're going to live in Woodstock. Well, no, we're not going to live in Woodstock. That was 40 years ago. We're living in Wanderlust now. Wanderlust with iPhones. That's where it's happening. It's happening right now. That's where the juice is. And so we want to envision the future juice in a quantum way of what enlightenment and what spiritual awakening is going to be like in 3 years, 10 years, 40 years, because at the moment you can't imagine it. So it's something to start to imagine that of which cannot be imagined. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, I really think we're in a vanguard of being able to understand the science of our vibratory body. I think we're going to see sound healing integrated in much broader ways, or I hope that we will, because it's such a, like with renewable energy, solar, wind, where it just takes 1 hour of the sun's energy can power, even all the crazy ways that we waste energy, just takes 1 hour to power all of the Earth's human energy that we're using for an entire year. So we're really, the shift that I think that Ron is talking about is really harnessing the potential that is already here, but also applying a kind of rigor to this. I think for those of us who are yoga teachers, I think it's really important to have kind of a rigorous inner dialogue of like, really, what's it all about? And to kind of, I think if you're an American, to keep choosing depth waters to swim in. I think it's really easy for things to become shallow or to become commercial. And I know Jeff and Skylar very well. They're practitioners. Their heart is inside this festival. And I think we'll start to see the spaces of entertainment actually becoming much more of like social medicine, and I hope in the most positive way, where we can really work with spaces to create states of being where we can function really at our highest level. This is really the power of music and chanting and meditation and movement that haven't really been systematically applied, but now we're starting to have studies, because it's free to be able to meditate and to chant and to work with your own inner entrainment. It's going to be by necessity that we return to our ancestral natural ways of healing, because it's so cost effective. So it's so strange that we have such an abundance of natural healing, but we choose to not tap into it. So I think the next 40 years will be all of us navigating those worlds where it seems that there's limited resources, and actually just going underneath the lens and seeing that there's actually tremendous energy. Just like in our meditation this morning, we were in the collective entrainment for an hour. That power can be used negatively too. That's the rigor. Really what's our depth intention. And I think we're all in for extraordinary life shifts in the next decades, and we're all part of it. And I think festivals are the place also where we can renew our inspiration, as Ron was describing. I know from those pretty much all of the teachers who have the opportunity to teach, there's that space of Shavasana meditation. For me, that's really the place that my greatest intention is towards that space, because I feel that's where people really receive, as Ron was describing, receive that kind of extraordinary insight that doesn't necessarily come from the outer mind's planning. And so we are in a quantum time, and that's the part we should continue to resource ourselves rather than just look at kind of the negative, limited perception of what's happening. Yeah.
Do we have time for 2 minutes? Or we?
So we want to end in meditation or Santana? What do the people say?
Yeah,
meditation or
Santana?
Santana?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. Let's stand then. Do you want to? We can stand. And I think we all want to encourage. We can feel that there's been a little threshold in the yoga world where sometimes the kind of primal freedom has been, structured. There's a process of taking the structural channels into our body, and I hope with just hearing a bit of Santana, we can align with this, not just our ancestors, our recent ancestors, and this whole spirit of Woodstock. And Ron's going to take us home.
We'll just close your eyes and move with the music and go into that place of not knowing, the place of the unknown, and just listen and let your body guide you to that deeper wisdom, that place that Rumi calls the inner jewel. Let the whole body just move.
I'd say let's start to add a bit of the joy current, our natural music makers in our hands. Let's just put our hands together. Passion and creativity and the love and joy current flow. We're going to take it on the 10, 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, and for the 1. Yay. Go for it.
Anybody have the reading glasses?
Okay.
Do you want to read it?
In the sweet territory of silence, we touch the mystery. It's a place of reflection and contemplation. It's the place where we can connect with the deep knowing to the deep wisdom way. So,
And Leonard Cohen, the Zen monk, says, You have to lose your grip, and then you slip into the masterpiece. You have to lose your grip, and then you slip into the masterpiece. Namaste.
Namaste.